Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another reading of Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. This is Chapter 2. The temperature on the surface of Hoth had dropped, but despite the frigid air, the Imperial probe droid continued its leisurely drift above the snow-swept fields and hills, its extended sensors still reaching in all directions for life signs. The robot's heat sensors suddenly reacted. It had found a heat source in the vicinity, and warmth was a good indication of life. The head swiveled on its axis, the sensitive eye-like blisters noting the direction from which the heat source originated. Automatically, the probe droid adjusted its speed and began to move at maximum velocity over the icy fields. The insect-like machine slowed only when it neared a mound of snow bigger than the probe droid itself. The robot's scanners made note of the mound's size, nearly 1.8 meters in height and an enormous 6 meters long. But the mound's size was of only secondary importance. What was truly astounding, if a surveillance machine could ever be astounded, was the amount of heat radiating from beneath the mound. The creature under that snowy hill must surely be well protected against the cold. A thin, blue-white beam of light shot from one of the probe robot's appendages, its intense heat boring into the white mound and scattering gleaming snowflakes in all directions. The mound began to shiver and to quake. Whatever existed beneath it was deeply irritated by the robot's probing laser beam. Snow began to fall away from the mound in sizable clumps when at one end, two eyes showed through the massive white. Huge yellow eyes peered with twin points of fire at the mechanical creature that continued to blast away from its painful beams. The eyes burned with primeval hatred for the thing that had interrupted its slumber. The mound shook again with a roar that nearly destroyed the probe droid's auditory sensors. It zoomed back several meters, widening the space between it and the creature. The droid had never before encountered a wampa ice creature. Its computers advised that the beast would be dealt with expeditiously. The droid made an internal adjustment to regulate the potency of its laser beam. Less than a moment later, the beam was at maximum intensity. The machine aimed the laser at the creature, enveloping it in a great flaming and smoking cloud. Seconds later, the few remaining particles of the wampa were swept away by the icy winds. The smoke disappeared, leaving behind no physical evidence, save for a large depression in the snow, that an ice creature had ever been there. But its existence had been properly recorded in the memory of the probe droid, which was already continuing on its programmed mission. The roars of another wampa ice creature finally awakened the battered young rebel commander. Luke's head was spinning, aching, perhaps exploding for all he could tell. With painstaking effort, he brought his vision into focus, discerning that he was in an ice gorge, its jagged walls reflecting the fading twilight. He suddenly realized he was hanging upside down, arms dangling and fingertips some 30 centimeters from the snowy floor. His ankles were numb. He craned his neck and saw that his feet were frozen in ice hanging from the ceiling, and that the ice was forming on his legs like stalactites. He could feel the frozen mask of his own blood caked on his face where the Wampa ice creature had viciously slashed him. Again, Luke heard the bestial moans, louder now as they resounded through the deep and narrow passageway of ice. The passageway of ice. The roars of the monster was deafening. He wondered which would kill him first, the cold or the fangs and claws of the thing that inhabited the gorge. I've got to free myself, he thought. Get free of this ice. His strength had not yet returned fully, but with a determined effort, he pulled himself up and reached for the confining bonds. Still too weak, Luke could not break the ice and fell back into his hanging position, the white floor rushing up at him. Relax, he said to himself, relax. The ice walls creaked with the ever louder bellows of the approaching creature. Its feet crunched on the frigid ground, coming frighteningly nearer. It would not be long before the shaggy white horror would be back and possibly warming the cold young warrior in the darkness of his belly. Luke's eyes darted about the gorge, finally spotting the pile of gear he had brought with him on his mission, now lying in a useless crumpled heap on the floor. The equipment was nearly a full, unattainable meter beyond his grasp, and with that gear was a device that entirely captured his attention. A stout hand grip unit with a pair of small switches and a surmounting metal disc. The object had once belonged to his father, a former Jedi Knight who had been betrayed and murdered by the young Darth Vader. But now it was Luke's, given to him by Ben Kenobi to be wielded with honor against Imperial tyranny. In desperation, Luke tried twisting his aching body just enough to reach the discarded lightsaber. But the freezing cold coursing through his body slowed him down and weakened him. Luke was beginning to resign himself to his fate as he heard the snarling Wampa ice creature approaching. His last feelings of hope were nearly gone when he sensed the presence. But it was not the presence of the white giant that dominated the gorge. Rather, it was that soothing spiritual presence which occasionally visited Luke in moments of stress or danger. The presence that had first come to him only after old Ben, once again in his Jedi role of Obi-Wan Kenobi, vanished into a crumple of his own dark robes after being cut down by Darth Vader's lightsaber. The presence that was sometimes like a familiar voice, an almost silent whisper that spoke directly to Luke's mind. Luke. The whisper was there again, hauntingly. Think of the lightsaber in your hand. The words made Luke's already aching head throb. Then he felt a sudden resurgence of strength, a feeling of confidence that urged him to continue fighting despite his apparently hopeless situation. His eyes fixed upon the lightsaber, his hand reached out painfully, the freezing in his limbs already taking its toll. He squeezed his eyes shut in concentration, but the weapon was still beyond his reach. He knew that the lightsaber would require more than just struggling to reach. Gotta relax, he told himself. Relax. Luke's mind whirled as he heard the words of his disembodied guardian. Let the force flow. The force. Luke saw the inverted gorilla-like image of the Wampa ice creature looming, its raised arms ending enormous gleaming claws. He could see the apish face for the first time now, and shivered at the sight of the beast's ram-like horns, the quivering lower jaw with protruding fangs. But then the warrior divorced the creature from his thoughts. He stopped struggling for his weapon His body relaxed and went limp, allowing his spirit to be receptive to his teacher's suggestion. Already he could feel the coursing through him, that energy field generated by all living things that bound that the very universe together. As Kenobi had taught him, the Force was within Luke to use as he saw fit. The Wampa ice creature spread his black hooked claws and lumbered toward the hanging youth. Suddenly, the lightsaber, as if by magic, sprang to Luke's hand. Instantly, he depressed the colored button on the weapon, releasing a blade like beam that quickly severed his icy bonds. As Luke, weapon in hand, dropped to the floor, the monstrous figure towering over him took a cautious step backward. The beast's sulphurous eyes blinked incredulously at the humming light shaft, a sight baffling to his primitive brain. Though it was difficult to move, Luke jumped to his feet and waved his lightsaber at the snow-white mass of muscle and hair, forcing it back a step, another step. Bringing the weapon down, Luke cut through the monster's hide with a blade of light. The Wampa ice creature shrieked, its hideous roar of agony shaking the gorge walls. It turned and hastily lumbered out of the gorge, and white bulk blending into the distant terrain. The sky was already noticeably darker, and with the encroaching darkness came the colder winds. The Force was with Luke, but even that mysterious power could not warm him now. Every step he took as he stumbled out the gorge was more difficult than the last. Finally, his vision dimming as rapidly as the daylight, Luke stumbled down an embankment of snow and was unconscious before he even reached the bottom. In the service main hangar dock, Chewie was getting the Millennium Falcon ready for takeoff. He looked up from his work to see a rather curious pair of figures that had just appeared from around a nearby corner to mingle with the usual rebel activity in the hangar. Neither of these figures was human, although one of them had a humanoid shape and gave the impression of a man in knightly golden armor. His movements were precise, almost too precise to be human. As he clanked stiffly through the corridor, his companion required no man-like legs for locomotion, for he was doing quite well rolling his shorter, barrel-like body along its miniature wheels. The shorter of the two droids was beeping and whistling excitedly. "It's not my fault, you malfunctioning tin can," the tall anthropomorphic droid stated, gesturing with a metallic hand. "I did not ask you to turn on the thermal heater. I merely commented it was freezing in the chamber. But it's supposed to be freezing. How are we going to get all her things dried out?" "Ah, you." C-3PO, the golden droid in a human shape, paused to focus optical sensors on the docked Millennium Falcon. The other robot, R2-D2, retracted his wheels and frontal leg and rested his stout metal body in the ground. The smaller droid's sensors were reading the familiar figures of Han Solo and his Wookiee companion as those two continued the work of replacing the freighter's central lifters. "Master Solo, sir," 3PO called, the only one of the robotic twosome equipped with an imitation human voice. "May I have a word with you, sir?" Han was not particularly in the mood to be disturbed, especially by this fastidious droid. "What is it?" "Mrs. Leia has been trying to reach you on the communicator," 3PO informed him. "It must be malfunctioning." Well, Han knew it was not. "I shut it off," he said as sharply as he continued working the ship. "What does Her Holiness want? What does Her Royal Holiness want?" 3PO's auditory sensors identified the disdain in Han's voice, but did not understand it. The robot mimicked a human gesture as he added, "She's looking for Master Luke, and soon he will be here with you. No one seems to know. Luke's not back yet?" Immediately, Han became concerned. He could see that the sky beyond the ice cavern entrance had grown considerably darker since he and Chewbacca had begun to repair the Millennium Falcon. Han knew just how severely the temperatures dropped on the surface after night, and how deadly the winds could be. In a flash, he jumped off the Falcon's lift, not even looking backward toward the Wookiee. Bolted down, Chewie. Officer of the deck, Han yelled. Deck officer, deck officer, Han yelled, then brought his comlink to his mouth and asked, Security control, has Commander Skywalker reported in yet? A negative reply brought a scowl to Han's face. The deck sergeant and his aide hurried up to Solo in response. Is Commander Skywalker back yet? Han asked, tension in his voice. I haven't seen him, the deck sergeant replied. It's possible he came in through the south entrance. It's possible. Check on it. It's getting dark out there. Why don't you go find out? Han Solo snapped, though he was not in an official position to give commands. It's urgent. As the deck sergeant and his aide turned and rushed down the corridor, R2 emitted a concerned whistle that rose inquiringly in pitch. I don't know, R2, through behind stiffly turning his upper torso and head in Han's direction. Sir, mind and inquire what's going on? Anger welled up inside Han as he grunted back to the robot. Go tell your precious princess that Luke is dead unless he shows up soon. R2 began to whistle hysterically at Solo's grim prediction, and his now frightened golden partner exclaimed, Oh no! The main tunnel was filled with activity when Han Solo rushed in. He saw a pair of rebel troopers employing all their physical strength to restrain a nervous Tauntaun that was trying to break free. From the opposite end, the deck officer rushed into the corridor, his eyes darting around the chamber till he had spotted Han. Sir, he said frantically, Commander Skywalker has to come to the south entrance. He might have forgotten to check in. Not likely. Han snapped. Our speed is ready? Not yet, the deck officer answered. Adapting them to the code has proven difficult, maybe by morning. Han cut him off. There wasn't any time to waste on machines that could and probably would break down. We'll have to go out on Tauntauns, out to Sector 4. The temperature's falling too rapidly. You bet it is, Han growled, and Luke's out in it. The other officer volunteered. I'll cover Sector 12. Have control set screen out. But Han knew there was no time for control to get its surveillance cameras operating. Not with Luke probably dying somewhere on the desert plains above. He pushed his way through the assemblage of rebel troops and took the reins of one of the trained Tauntauns, leaping onto the creature's back. The night storms will start before any of you can reach the first marker. And I'll see you in hell, grunted Han, tugging the reins of his mount and maneuvering the animal out of the cave. Snow was falling heavily as Han Solo raced his Tauntaun through the wilderness. Night was near, and the winds were howling fiercely, piercing his heavy clothes. He knew that he would be as useless as an icicle to Luke unless he found the young warrior soon. The Tauntaun was already feeling the effects of temperature drop. Not even his layers of insulating fat or the matted gray fur could protect him from the elements after nightfall. Already the beast was wheezing, his breathing becoming increasingly labored. Han prayed that the snow lizard wouldn't drop, at least not until he had located Luke. He drove his mount harder and fortunate across the icy plains. Another figure was moving across the snow, its metal body hovering above the frozen ground. The Imperial probe droid paused briefly in mid-flight, its sensors twitching. Then, satisfied with his findings, the robot gently lowered itself, coming to rest on the ground like spider legs. Several probes separated from the metal hull, dislodging some of the snow that had settled there. Some that began to take shape around the robot, a pulsating glow that gradually covered the machine as if as if with a transparent dome. Quickly, this force field solidified, repelling the blowing snow that brushed off the droid's hull. After a moment, the glow faded, and the blowing snow soon formed a perfect dome of white, completely concealing the droid and its protective force field. The Tauntaun was racing at maximum speed, certainly too fast considering the distance it had traveled and the unbearable frigid air. No longer wheezing, it had begun moaning pitifully, and his legs were becoming more and more unsteady. Han felt sorry about the Tauntaun's pain, but at present the creature's life was only secondary to that of his friend Luke. It was becoming difficult for Han to see through the thickening snowfall. Desperate, he searched for some interruption in the eternal plains, some distant spot that might actually be Luke. But there was nothing to see other than the darkening expanses of snow and ice. Yet there was a sound. Han drew the reins in, bringing the Tauntaun to an abrupt stop on the plain. Solo could not be certain, but there seemed to be some sound other than the howling of the winds that whipped past him. He strained to look in the direction of the sound. Then he spurred his Tauntaun, forcing it to gallop across the snow-swept field. Luke could have been a corpse, food for the scavengers by the time the light of dawn returned. But somehow he was still alive, though barely, and struggling to stay that way even with the night storms violently assaulting him. Luke painfully pulled himself upright from the snow, only to be blasted back down to the freezing gale. As he fell, he considered the irony of it all. A farm boy from Tatooine maturing to battle the Death Star, now perishing alone in a frozen alien wasteland. It took all of Luke's remaining strength to drag himself a half meter before collapsing, sinking into the ever-deepening drifts. I can't, he said, though no one could hear his words. But someone, though still unseen, had heard. You must. The words vibrated in Luke's mind. Luke, look at me. Luke could not ignore that command. The power of those softly spoken words was too great. With great effort, Luke lifted his head, saw what he thought was a hallucination. In front of him, apparently unaffected by the cold, and still clad only in the shabby robes he had worn in the hot desert of Tatooine, stood Ben Kenobi. Luke wanted to call out to him, but he was speechless. The apparition spoke with the same gentle authority Ben had always used with a young man. You must survive, Luke. The young commander found the strength to move his lips again. I'm cold, so cold. You must go to the Dagobahs, the spectral figure of Ben Kenobi instructed. You will learn from Yoda, the Jedi Master who taught. Luke listened, then reached to touch the ghostly figure. Ben! Ben! He groaned. The figure remained unmoved by Luke's efforts to reach him. Luke, you're our only hope. Our only hope. Luke was confused, yet before he could gather the strength to ask for an explanation, the figure began to fade, and when every trace of the apparition had passed from his sight, Luke thought he saw the approach of a Tauntaun and a human rider on his back. Excuse me. The snow lizard was approaching its gait, G-A-I-T, its gait unsteady. The rider was still too far away, too obscured by the storm for identification. In desperation, the young rebel commander called out, Ben! Before again dropping off into unconsciousness. The snow lizard was barely able to stand on its Saurian hind legs when Han Solo reined in to a stop and dismounted. Luke looked with horror at the snow-covered, almost frozen form, lying as if dead at his feet. "Come on, buddy," he appealed to Luke's inert figure, immediately forgetting his own nearly frozen body. "You aren't dead yet. Give me a signal here." Han could detect no sign of life and noticed that Luke's face, nearly covered with snow, was savagely torn. He rubbed at the youth's face, being careful not to touch the drying wounds. "Don't do this, Luke. It's not your time." Finally, a slight response. A low moan, barely audible over the winds, was strong enough to send a warm glow through Han's own shivering body. He grinned with relief. "I knew you wouldn't leave me out here all alone. Gotta get you out of here." Knowing that Luke's salvation, his own and his own, lay in the speed of the Tauntaun, Han moved toward the beast, carrying the young warrior limply in his arms. But before he could drape the unconscious form over the animal's back, the snow lizard gave an agonized roar, then fell into the shaggy gray heap on the snow. Laying his companion down, Han rushed to the side of the fallen creature. The Tauntaun made one final sound, not a roar or bellow, but only sickly rasp. Then the beast was silent. Solo gripped the Tauntaun's hide, his numbed fingers searching for even the slightest indication of life. "Deader than the Triton moon," he said, knowing that Luke did not hear a word. "We haven't got much time." Resting Luke's motionless form against the belly of the dead snow lizard, Han proceeded to work. It might be something of a sacrilege, he mused, using the Jedi Knight's favorite weapon like this. But right now, Luke's lightsaber was the most efficient and precise tool to cut through the thick skin of a Tauntaun. At first, the weapon felt strange in his hand, but momentarily he was cutting the animal's carcass, from hairy head to scaly hind paws. Han winced at the foul odor that rose from the steaming incision. There were few things he could remember that stank like a snow lizard's innards. Without deliberation, he tossed the slippery entrails into the snow. When the animal's corpse had been entirely eviscerated, Han shoved his friend inside the warm, hair-covered skin. "I know this doesn't smell so good, Luke, but it'll keep you from freezing. I'm sure the Tauntaun wouldn't hesitate if it were the other way around." From the body of the snow lizard, another blast of the entrail stench rose out of its disemboweled cavity. "Whew!" Han almost gagged. "It's just as well you're out cold. Just as well you're out cold, pal." There wasn't much time left to do what had to be done. Han's freezing hands went to the supply pack strapped in Tauntaun's back and rummaged through the rebel-issued items until he located a shelter container. Excuse me. Before unpacking, he spoke into his comlink. "Echo base, do you copy?" No response. His comlink is useless. The sky had darkened ominously and the winds blew violently, making every breathing close to impossible. Han fought to open the shelter container and stiffly began to construct the one piece of rubber equipment that might protect them both, if only for a short while longer. "If I don't get the shelter up fast," he grumbled to himself, "Jabba won't need those bounty hunters." And that is the end of Chapter 2 of The Empire Strikes Back.